Thanks so much, Ed. I think we're probably ready to start now. Thanks very much. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Story of Co-Design. My name is Helen Sorrell and I'm a community organiser with the Hubs team. This webinar is part of a series of presentations from our team in which we'll be sharing our insights on topics ranging from placemaking to community engagement. Taking part in today's session on co-design are my Community Hub colleagues Azzy Ali, our Senior Programme Officer, and Neve Lincoln, who is an architect focusing on placemaking and urban design in our team. We're also absolutely delighted to be joined by some industry-leading professionals who've spent time working on our co-design projects, namely Susan Ritchie from Mutual Gain and architect Anthony Staples from RCKa.
Hello.
We're also going to be joined by a 14-year-old Redbridge resident, Kishan, who took part in the Seven Kings project. So we'll be hearing from him later on. Brilliant. Hello, Kishan. Great you're on the line. Discussion is a really important part of this session and we have a good amount of time for questions at the end. So please put your queries in the chat as we go along. We'll be looking at them and we'll aim to get as many as we can answered at the end. Please feel free to add more in the discussion period as well, of course. We'll finish by 1 p.m. and we're recording the session, or at least I hope we are. I forgot to, we are. Thanks, Ed. We're recording the session as well, so you'll be able to share it with others if you'd like to. Over to you, Asya.
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Asya Ali, and I'm going to give a quick update on the Community Hubs programme. So if we could start the slide. And next slide, please. So the programme was launched in 2018. It is a commitment from the Council to collaborate with residents to establish 6 new purpose-built hubs that reflect local priorities. They're going to be physical spaces where communities can come together and deliver their own activities and use services such as GPs, libraries and spaces for hire. The hubs will be cross-subsidised through the building of homes on each site. The location of each hub has been decided in terms of their accessibility to residents. So today we're going to focus on the co-design activities undertaken to date, what this process entailed, key takeaways and lessons learned. So the programme was born from an aspiration to change the relationship between citizens and the council, improve access to services across Redbridge and maximise the impact of council's resources. So residents are at the heart of the programme and they play a crucial part in our co-design work. A couple of them were kind enough to give us their thoughts on the co-design process. First, let's hear from Michael Willis, who is a Centre Manager at Hainault Forest Community Association. He was involved in the Hainault Hub co-design process from the start.
But the co-design process is a very important one when you're dealing with a project as large as this one of the community centre is going to be. You can't just have a minority group of council workers or council architects dealing with a big situation like this, because the local residents want an input. They want to know what's going on. They don't want it all built and then they go, why didn't they do that? Why didn't they do that? And that's why it's so important to get a group of people with different ideas to achieve the ultimate aim of having a successful hub, community hub for the future.
Was there much debate in your group?
Yes, lots of debate, differing ideas, but then it switched to people who had a different idea, agreeing with what perhaps the majority of people within the group were saying.
And now we're going to hear from 14-year-old Redbridge student Kishan, who took part in the youth co-design group for Seven Kings. When he joined the programme, he didn't know how seriously he would be taken.
I wasn't sure how it would be. I wasn't sure if they would take me seriously or not. But after the first session and the first few, I was like, this is going to be like real. They're really going to take my opinion on board. When we were talking, they really took in what we said. They really valued our opinions. So that was nice.
What kind of debates did you have?
We often had debates about what we would do with the spaces. So say there was areas. We had like specific areas, and we had to decide what would we do with them. So does this free space where we had to decide, will we use this for relaxation, will we use this for exercise, for clubs or whatever. So we had to, everyone had their own opinions, everyone had their own ideas of what they wanted. So we all had to kind of collaborate and say, we had to pick one final product of what we wanted. So we had to try and choose, and we had to say we can't have this due to logistical reasons. I think someone wanted a gaming room, and we had to figure out how can we do this while not interrupting other people. So if people want to study and people want to play games, we have to figure out a way to compromise and make sure people get to study and have a quiet space, or who want to play have that area where they can do that. Yeah.
Thanks. So picking up that, I'm Niamh. Hello. We'll be hearing more from Kishan in the Q&A. But first, just to touch quickly on what co-design means for us in Redbridge. So there are lots of terms that are used to describe quite different engagement processes, and they're often used kind of interchangeably and lose their meaning. So for clarity and consistency, we're using this definition of co-design, where co refers to collaborating equally to influence the process from start to finish, and ensuring that everyone feels able to fully participate to generate useful ideas and solutions. Next slide, please, Ed. So why have we used this approach for delivering the hubs? So the first one's really about delivering better buildings, because essentially it's a process that future-proofs the design by involving end users from the start. And it's a more pragmatic way to deliver a project, because it's by collaborating with people who have kind of expert knowledge of where they live and of what works and doesn't for that place. And it opens up design considerations beyond what kind of any one professional could imagine in isolation. Also, by bringing people together, it helps to create connected communities who have a voice and allows us to have a better understanding of local issues and to identify services that people need. So next one, please. And our litmus test really for making sure that the process is genuine is to ask ourselves what has materially changed as a result of this activity, and how different would it have been without resident involvement, and being clear that that's how we measure success. Next one, please. Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with this, every building project, so kind of every architectural project, goes through an 8-stage design process, which is called the RCKa stages from the Royal Institute of British Architects. So it goes from strategic definition at stage 0, which is really about setting a business case, through to stage 7 in use, which is when there's a series of post-occupancy evaluations that take place. And that's essentially interviewing end users to make sure that the building's working well and that it meets the brief that was set at stage 1. And so, in hubs, rather than developing an approach and getting feedback on it, we've looked to co-design every element of the programme. So to do this effectively is meant starting the conversation right from the outset and kind of being open-minded about whatever the design outcome might kind of evolve into. So stage 0 is about understanding the place and formulating a community vision with local people. Stage 1, so this is the point where we got a design team on board to look at feasibility proposals, including RCKa, who'll speak in a moment. But so to do this, we onboarded residents to join us on the evaluation panel for appointing the architects. And this stage is really about establishing design principles, which then serve as a brief and a way of kind of appraising the project's success as it iterates through later stages. And then that would be revisited as part of the post-occupancy evaluation at stage 7. And then stages 2 and 3 are really about collaborating with residents to kind of shape the concept designs. So I'll now pass on to Susan, who's been on this journey since the get-go.
Hi, thanks, Niamh. And thank you, everybody, for coming along and inviting me to be part of it. It's very exciting because I was it was only Asia and I that were right involved at the very, very beginning from the Hubs team. So I was a consultant at the start doing some engagement work with for the council, and we did the engagement work for the Seven Kings Hub, which is the first hub that will be developed. And then I helped the team recruit the wider hubs team a bit later. And though they had each hub has got its own lead, and one of the leads went on maternity leave for Seven Kings, and I was asked to keep the continuity of that community dialogue going. Would I consider doing that role in the interim until we passed over to Peter, who you'll see on the call today? So I've had a different role in this process as a consultant and then as part of the team, but all the way through that, the community has been at the heart of that. So so it gives me such pleasure to see Kishan on the call, which is great, because Kishan was part of the process that helped us develop the first kind of iteration of what a community hub might look like in Seven Kings. So I'm going to show you a film in a minute, which is the culmination of all the work that they did in the co-design process. So Ed, when you're ready, could you just bring that up? Okay, lovely. So after a number of sessions, which I'll talk about later, you can see these 3 floors at the bottom of that building will be a community hub. So it's a big space, almost 3,000 square metres of space. So it can be used for all sorts of different things. I think it's useful to see it because people have very different perceptions of what a community hub might look like. You know, it could be a library, it could be the corner of a room or something. So, you know, you can see the size of this. It's big, and you look, that terrace up there will be a public terrace as well. So just give you a flavour of what's inside. As you go in there, you'll come to a welcome session, a welcome space, and that's by community hosts. And the group said they wanted to see people that were more like hosts, not receptionists, not officials in that process. Sorry, the video's stopped, but there you go. So you'll see that there. So they wanted an element of interactivity and personal meet and greet. This is going along on your left here. You'll see a community kitchen, and you'll see a multi-purpose space, and then you've got that cafe, and right at the end there's another space which takes you down a corridor where you might have consultancy rooms there for people to use. But there you go, that's the hub's dance that we created when we all came together, and there is the community kitchen, which could be used by different organisations and the community. So I just wanted to give it a flavour of that. I mean, the film's 11 minutes, we're not going to go through that, but as you go upstairs then you will go up to a children's area and a co-working space, which will be open to local community organisations, local people to use as that community space. You can see an outdoor terrace there, which will be used by the children's services in the main, and they've got their space there, which will mainly be for children's services. And then when you go up to the next floor, there's a big library and there's a GP area upstairs. So everybody will be using every space. Every space is multi-purpose. The only space which isn't open to everybody is the GP space, but otherwise every space should be multi-purpose, multifunctional. And that brings me on to I'll tell you a little bit about the co-design with young people as well, because they have their own space too. So I'll just leave it there. You can get a sense. We've got pods there. Those are those red things. They are kind of people that can meet in there, whether that be the residents meeting with other residents or whether it be services meeting with residents. So that's the Seven Kings Hub. There's a picture of the lovely youth co-design process. And I'll pass over now. Oh no, actually I've got a bit of time. I can talk to you about the process, a bit more in the process. Thanks for that. Right, so what did we do then? The mechanics of the process is we held 13 workshops with a sortition-led group of local people. So if you don't know what sortition is basically the process of a random selection of people, a bit like you'd get when you're selected for jury service. And you want that random selection to reflect what the local community looked like in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, etc. So we recruited a group of local people, and then we took them through 13 workshops with architects to look at this. We had nothing on paper and we had to create something, and that video is what they created in terms of their sort of input about how they want to use spaces, how the place should be governed. So it wasn't just about the physical space, it was also about how the community can get involved in the governance of that. Although we had young people in that process, we were advised by that group that said at the end, look, you know, we've got young people in it, but we really ought to speak to younger people and have a specific youth focus on this. So we then did a call out to young people in Redbridge, for which Kishan was part of, and they looked at, is this hub youth friendly, as in, you know, you could use any of the spaces in this hub as a young person, and do you need a specific space for young people? And if so, what would you use that space for, and which space would it be? So out of that whole hub, they were offered the opportunity to have the top floor library space or to have a ground floor space. So we took them through a series of sessions about what they wanted to do, as Kishan said, and how they wanted to use that space. And eventually they voted and decided on the use of the ground floor space. So in all of that co-design process, there was a lot of deliberation that needed to take place, and people had to trade off. They're thinking about, but if we did this, then this would need to change. If we did that, how are we going to deal with something else that's come up in that process? Everybody who took part in that process were paid, and after each session we used polls to kind of make sure in that deliberative stage everybody talked about their different perspectives and what they could come together on and what they couldn't, and then everybody was given an individual opportunity to vote after that on different aspects that came out of the session. So they were able to do that consensus building, but they did also have their own individual say on that too. So I'll pass over to Anthony, who was supporting with the Gants Hill Hub.
Yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, my name's sort of Anthony Toney. I'm from RCKa Architects, and we were brought on board by Redbridge Council for the Gants Hill Hub, building off the back of sort of Susan's work and working with sort of Asia and Paul. Got sort of four points I want to make. I've been asked to reflect on kind of what makes a successful co-design project, sort of building on my experience of Gants Hill. And I think the first thing I want to do really, and I don't quite know who the 58 participants of this call are, but is to applaud Redbridge really, because the most important thing with co-design is to embed it in the process as early as possible, where local people can have the greatest influence over the sort of projects that are being brought forward. And really, Redbridge with their Community Hubs program, in terms of the time they've created, the space, the resource they've allocated to this, and also just a general willingness to kind of share information and be open, has been really, really incredible and quite unique amongst clients I've worked with. So, you know, that the starting point of co-design is one of the most key ones, and that's something that I think we can all learn from Redbridge. The next slide. The other thing to say about co-design is it's not a sort of one glove fits all process, and this is particularly interesting as we hear more and more people talk about co-design in the industry, and we talk about the different tools and techniques that people can use. And I think what we need to realise is that co-design needs to be adaptive to fit the needs of a specific community. Every place is different, so every co-design process needs to be adjusted to meet that. And you know, as a kind of creative professional, I find that challenge of kind of designing a process as exciting as kind of designing a building or any end product. So on Gants Hill, it was quite an amazing experience because really we were all set up to do our engagement process. We were going to all bake some cakes and turn up in front of some tube stations and wave some coloured flags, and then COVID hit. And really in the space of sort of 2 weeks, we had to work with Redbridge to pivot, to not abandon the scheme because of this sort of supernatural disaster, but actually think, how can we change things? How can we build on positives? And how can we actually really use co-design to bring people together at a time when everyone was stuck in their, you know, bedrooms and living rooms and actually almost needed connection more than ever before. So that was great. So again, applause to Redbridge for being able to pivot and be flexible on that. And there were some really interesting outcomes of doing things online in terms of sometimes hearing from quieter voices, the way people respected one another. You know, actually there was some real advantages that we've taken into the post-pandemic world. The third thing I'd like to sort of touch on after kind of doing it early and being flexible is just some sort of specific learnings from the process we did at Gants Hill. I mean, Susan's already touched on that sortition process, and that was amazingly powerful in terms of creating a representative group of people that we could really work with and have conversations over a kind of period of time, over a series of co-design sessions, which is another thing to emphasize really. It wasn't just one session, you know, it was a whole process program of meetings. But the important thing is to sort of treat the stakeholders that you're working with as your kind of connections into the wider community. So we need to create a co-design environment while those stakeholders feel empowered and sufficiently upskilled that they can go back, speak to people in the community during COVID, just speak to the people that they were sort of living with at the time, and be a sort of supporting role and bring back feedback. And through that way, the sort of professional team at Redbridge and the design team might only be engaging with sort of 40, 50 people, but your outreach can be into the hundreds or even thousands in terms of the feedback you're receiving through your stakeholders as a kind of conduit. And also building on that, the next slide was the way, again, thinking about how you can place your stakeholders central stage and how the design team can step back. A kind of traditional, one-stop co-design session is people turn up, architect presents something, people debate, then people are asked to summarize. And that requires people to digest a lot of information in a very short period of time. And it also prioritizes people who are sort of happy to talk a lot. So we sort of slightly flip that on its head, and through a series of sessions, we sort of reorganize it to put stakeholders central stage. So actually each session will begin with stakeholders actually presenting their thoughts and having a conversation. We would then share some more information that would educate and inform stakeholders and set up an activity for the following week. There would be a bit of debate, and then we'd ask people to go away and think about it for a week and then come back to us. So again, that allowed time for people to reach out to more stakeholders, talk to their neighbours. It allowed the quieter people time to think. So again, placing stakeholders centre stage. And then the final point I want to make, because I realise I'm sort of taking 5 minutes, so a little bit more than I wanted to. But anyways, next slide. Is this point about co-design being a process and sort of recognising that it sort of goes on and it grows and it evolves over time. And really what you're doing, particularly at an early stage of a project, is setting up a framework which allows further ideas to evolve and develop. So really interestingly, in this project, we were commissioned to do a feasibility study, as Niamh said, and we did go through multiple designs for the site. But really, we were very clear with our sort of design group that the outputs would not be, this is our preferred design, because actually that would narrow down the conversation in later stages and people will feel restricted by decisions were made. Instead, we came up with a series of design principles that we worked really hard on the wording to, and we got buy-in from, so that they provided the basis for further co-design and further conversation down the line while securing what really mattered. And the final slide is just a little extract of a couple of those co-design principles and the outputs of our session, really. So around sort of green space and safety and cycling and various other things. But anyways, that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Tony. Some really great information there and some questions coming in, which we'll come to shortly. But first of all, I think we want to really ask our panel what was learned in the process, what worked and what didn't work. I'm going to ask Susan first.
Thank you. Yeah, I think lots of things really. I suppose it's useful to know the context that Redbridge, when I first started working with them, were very much communications focused as opposed to co-design, and the co-design emerged from that. So when I first started working, it was more like, as Anthony says, you might be at a station telling people that these are coming. Then we moved that to community engagement, where there was deliberative events run, and then from that engagement, we then moved to co-design. So the learning for me is having a very inspirational leader at the top of an organisation who doesn't want to recruit in the image of traditional public sector or traditional local government, but are happy to bring people in who have got very different expertise that add value to local government. So that was really quite useful. The litmus test in terms of what changed, I remember being in a meeting where the community had asked for a community kitchen, and there was a view from the team that we won't be doing a community kitchen. Why would we have a community kitchen? These things never get used. And then they were able to make their case, and as you can see in that film, there is a community kitchen there, and in fact that's become one of the most popular elements of the hub when we were sharing it across the wider community. And they talked about support for homeless as well, and that's embedded into that process. So I think that's what you get when you work with a group of people that are randomly selected. They come together, and what you can get from the output of that is a coalition of thinking of what this community needs, as opposed to my own self-interest, what I need. They start to think about other people and how they are part of that community and how they might use it, but how other people might use it. They influence the thinking and design, but of course it does take time and it takes a lot of resource. So I don't think you can do it on the cheap. I don't think you should do it on the cheap, because we're public services and public services should be invested in public engagement. And I've been on this sort of rant for decades now, but I used to say years ago, there was some research done that if any business was doing some market research, they would allocate 3% of their overall income to think about what their customers want. And I wouldn't suggest for 1 minute that local government is a business or should replicate businesses, because it is about citizenship and serving the citizens of that area. But nonetheless, are we allocating the right amount of resources sometimes to people? And I saw in Redbridge that allocation of resources was like nothing I've seen before in any other public sector organisation, which was great. One of the things I would change is service engagement. I don't think services, this team is positioned in, was positioned in the regeneration team. So you can imagine if you work in children's services or social care, any of those sorts of departments, you might think, why are these people from regen talking to me about co-design when I work with service users all the time? And should I really take them seriously? So I think there was a bit of that in the very early days. It's quite difficult to get services engaged at first, and then when you bring that to life and show them what the building might look like, it really does get interest from services. They start to see themselves in it, and they're seeing what the local community have designed. So I thought that was quite an interesting process, a bit of a like, why regen? And then sort of, oh, well, actually, that looks quite nice. I can see myself in there, or, oh, be careful, this might not work so well in a hub. So I think you must have services on board and ideally in the same room during the same process in some shape or form. But the way we got round that is by inviting expertise in. So, you know, using networks of people who have been involved in stuff like this before. They brought their own expertise to the community. So, yeah, they'd be my sort of key takeaways. In terms of the big one for me, I'm about building social capital. How do you build that connection? And that's what the purpose of the hubs is. To see Kishan still involved in this process is just like warms my heart, because, you know, as he said, he didn't know whether anybody was going to listen to him. He didn't know whether this was going to be a tick box exercise. And I think you heard from him, it wasn't. So I suppose it's for me to say, really over to you, Kishan, because I remember the day we first met, and seeing you now articulate the process is really great. So I just wondered, what were your thoughts on that? You touched on whether you thought it was going to be, whether you were going to be listened to or not. But I just wondered, was there any other things that came out of this process which were either expected or unexpected in that? And secondly, with the youth co-design, some of the young people said they weren't sure if they were going to use it, and now they see it as a building that looks like it does and that they've been part of the design. I just wondered if you would consider using it now.
Yeah, so I definitely would use it more. I'm more likely to use it considering that I've been in this process. So in the future, I can go there, and because it's things that I would like and I need in the future. So it's definitely something I would use, and I don't think I would be that well informed about what's going to be there, where it's going to be, if I hadn't been part of this process. I'm definitely more likely to use it. In the process, I learned a lot of skills. Mainly, I learned teamwork skills, because after COVID, we were all inside our houses, so I hadn't gotten out much. Even school was online, so I hadn't worked with a group and talked to them and talked about what I wanted. I hadn't done that for a while, so I guess that kind of helped me with my teamwork skills, my communication skills, because that had kind of been underdeveloped during that time. So I guess I really learned how to talk and work in a group. Also, I made a lot of friends during that, because I guess I met a lot of people in my community. So Seven Kings, I learned about people where they go to school. So I learned about people in that area, and then hubs, I learned a lot about the area as well. So also in the Seven Kings, there were just young people, but in the Hainaut one, there's old people and young people. So I learned about different perspectives, and I learned about things that I wouldn't learn in school. So about the area, so about things that I didn't even know about, and different people's opinions. So there was this man in a wheelchair. So I learned about how his life was and how difficult it was for him to do everything, which I take for granted. So it was definitely eye-opening in that I saw lots of different perspectives from different people.
Brilliant, Kishan. Thank you so much for adding that in. It's really interesting to hear how, some of the skills you learned made up for some of what you'd missed out during COVID, which is, of course, a difficult time for all of us, including young people. Tony, what about your sort of key takeaways? What worked, what didn't from the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think I talked a little bit about those in the sort of with the slides I ran through, and certainly I want to sort of echo Susan's point about sort of seeing Kishan here. And I wasn't fortunate enough to sort of work with Kishan, but definitely over the course of the process we worked on with Gans Hill, building those relationships with the design champions and seeing them learn and understand the process was really important. I mean, I think the thing I want to talk about, you asked me, and when we were preparing for this, sort of what is co-design and why, and why would you want to do it? And I think what we started to talk about is, especially from the perspective of kind of the professional, from the sort of service deliverer or the council or design team, is kind of stepping back from that kind of decision maker role and actually just becoming a bit of a facilitator and actually opening up the sort of knowledge and the expertise that we have to a wider public, to the community, so that we can provide people, like Kishan, but all the people that live in his area with the tools they need to kind of make the decisions for themselves. So that's what I feel co-design sort of should allow to happen, and the benefit of that is you get places and spaces and services and buildings that really genuinely respond to a local need, and whether you're a local authority whose mission aim is to deliver sort of successful services that people engage with, or frankly you're in the private sector and your mission aim is to get punters through the door, it seems to be an absolute no-brainer to me that sort of co-design is that process by which you sort of respond to what people want, and it's incredibly gratifying and enjoyable as someone who, again, as from that professional perspective, someone who who's had the sort of been society's given me these tools. I've been to university and learn about architecture and design, and to be able to kind of open that up, demystify it, show that it's not capable, and sort of facilitate rather than decide, it's just fantastic.
Thanks, Tony. I think this brings very much to mind something that one of our colleagues who's not able to be here today was talking to us about, and that's Geeta Hagun, who's leads one of the families teams at Redbridge. And she said that from her work in the co-design process, understanding the principles of getting service users, residents, whatever you want to call them, involved in designing services and buildings, that she was then able to take that away to work that they were doing in her team, applying for grants, looking at funding opportunities from people like the GLA, who are increasingly requesting that services that you're applying for money for are designed with service users and residents, are co-designed, really. So she felt that her comment was that we're very much ahead of the curve, but it was something that was really coming online and people needed to take quite seriously. Susan, I was also going to ask you, I know that in Seven Kings there's going to be a nursery which is currently based at the RCKa Children's Centre, and I know that you had lots of conversations with the team at RCKa. I'm just wondering if there's anything particular about that experience that comes to mind in terms of how their input, a services input into a building design changed things.
Yeah, like I say, in the early stages, I think people are always a little bit cautious about what's coming up, what these regen people doing and what they're talking about. What does that mean for me? People are managing the change, like they've got to move buildings. And what does that mean for their service users and their children's centres, So they're more than just care. They're providing all sorts of support for vulnerable users. So they have a natural concern, maybe a healthy questioning about what's the purpose of this. So I think in the early stages they were a bit kind of what's all this about? Can we keep our rooms and can we keep everything that we want? And of course you can't in a multi-purpose space. So the space would have to be shared, but they would have it every day, if you like, but it can be shared with other people in the evening. I found that working with them, showing the film was a really good way of enabling people, all services, to see what it could look like. And when you showed that, I remember a meeting with Thackeray Drive where they spoke about, wow, we could do this in that space. This would be really great for that space. And look, we would be able to do more of this if we were in that space. So there was a really positive response to that. But there are practical things we still have to think about, not just talking about, how they might use the space. There were practical things that we had to go to consultation and think about what's the impact on the people using that hub now and how they might use the one in the future. So the travel distance in the main, is this going to impact negatively or positively on them? And as far as I remember, my memory is not as good as it used to be, but that was also very positive, that it didn't have much of a negative impact on that because it wasn't that far away from people. And we did lots of focused dialogue in the children's centres as well to talk about what the impact might be, and we did that through our community organisers. So yeah, I think it takes time with services. Change comes and goes in the public sector. Restructures happen all the time, new initiatives happen all the time, and I suppose the nice thing about watching the Seven Kings Hub evolve is it wasn't going anywhere. This was a good few years of work. It wasn't let's do a couple of meetings and use the findings to develop something. It was an ongoing process, and the community organisers played a really strong part in that.
I suppose one particular thing that comes to mind is, again, someone who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but someone from the Children's Centre said to me in one of her conversations with one of the team, we were talking about a space that they was quite open originally, but they need private space to talk to parents and carers confidentially sometimes. So about actually kind of like putting that space in, which I suppose really underlined to me that if you accept that no one can be an expert in everything, why would you design a building with just one person's or, with one vision? That the real efficiency, the benefit, because if you designed a building without that space, you'd have to put it in. You'd have to have nasty little cheap old cubicles shoved in. It would have ruined the design, and everyone would have said, why didn't they think of this before?
Yeah, one of the things you're touching on though is the transformation programme. So I used to always be sort of thinking about, we're not lifting and shifting services around and finding them a new location. That's one element of the work, but it was about how do we work more collaboratively? How do people that want to use services have a much more of a seamless experience, so they don't have to go to one building for one thing and then another building for another thing. So the challenge around that is you can't lift and shift everything you've got there and put it into a hub, but you will be able to. So if you want to split, so when we were doing those conversations, we knew that people needed private space to have private conversations, but it couldn't be their own office. It needed to be something that everybody could use. Otherwise, you would have that office perhaps sitting there empty. So those red hubs red pods that you saw in the film, they could be used by services or they could be used by residents at any different times of the day, which is another important thing, really saying what the times of the use. When I first started working with the hubs, with the council before the hubs team were involved, it was going to be possibly 9 to 5, and if they were radical it was like 8 to 6. But then that moved, like as people started to think about how do people use services, how do people, what people's lives like, that moved until it went on to like a 10 o'clock close, and it would be open at the weekends, which opens up so much more space for communities to use it as well. So it doesn't become a municipal building, it becomes a space that is genuinely used and valued by everybody.
Brilliant. I'm going to pick up some questions now. The question from Sarah Cook. You mentioned that residents were involved in the evaluation panel. Can you say a bit more about how that happened? I'm going to ask Neve Lincoln, our Community Hubs architect expert, to answer that one.
Yeah, sure. So Robin's also on the call. I'm conscious he was in the process with us, but so we were keen to involve residents in kind of deciding who the architect team would be, because it felt like quite a critical kind of yeah, stage in the process and kind of in line with our overall co-design commitment. And so practically what that looked like was, so we advertised the opportunity through Redbridge kind of council comms channels. The community organisers and the team were really helpful at kind of getting the word out about it. And we're really clear about what the commitment looked like in terms of people's time and kind of what the task in hand would look like. So also clarifying that, you know, we weren't looking for somebody who had pre-existing you know, design expertise, but just a kind of willingness to be in that process. So residents were invited to express interest, and then we selected a panel. And again, as Susan was saying, it was a paid opportunity. So so it's a more like equitable opportunity in that way. And we gave the necessary training and support in terms of kind of, you know, what procurement documents look like, you know, with the valuation guidance. And so, for instance, in Hainault, where we did this over the summer, we ended up with a panel of four evaluators. So it was 2 members of the council and 2 residents, one being Mick, who was in that video, and the other person was a teenager who wanted to learn about architecture and was kind of interested in exploring that as a career opportunity. So it was a really good opportunity for her to kind of learn more about the profession and to see kind of different avenues that could take. So to, you know, it's helped to kind of upskill her, and then brought really different perspectives to the process. And mainly, you know, it's felt like an important opportunity to be really transparent to residents about kind of how these decisions are made, and, you know, which is something that residents don't usually have sight of, and to be brought into that process and ultimately kind of have, you know, equal decision-making power, because we ended up with a panel that was 50% residents, 50% council. So yeah, I hope that answers the question, Sarah.
Brilliant, thanks, Neve. I'm going to go to a question from Gurdeep now. How long, he asked, did the whole process from conception to designs being prepared take? I'm going to go to Susan on this one.
Well, how long did they take? How long should they take? I mean, I remember some long evenings with Paul Perkins, were really sort of thinking through, where's this space for influence? Where, let's make sure we're not asking them nice things, you know, things we'd just like to know, but let's make sure we're really getting their input on things that they can influence. And that takes a bit of time to work through in those session outlines. I mean, the actual delivery of the sessions can take as long. I mean, they were doing 13 workshops, and I think from memory that took a few months to do, and generally could take, I mean, you can do these things in the time, you can condense it or you can extend it. I suppose the thing to think about when it comes to timing is, where are the points at which decisions are being made that you're using this data for? So, you know, it might be you're doing something early, like Anthony talked about, developing the principles, and in Hainault they're developing the principles, so that's that bit, and you might use multiple methods for that. But then you might come back to them at a later stage, use different methods to get their influence on the next stage about how the building should be spec'd out, if you like, the kind of what's the use of that building, and what's the specification you need to do. So, and that's not a very good answer, because it is a bit like, how long does a piece of string take when you're doing co-design? But in this case, it took months.
Thanks, Susan. While I've got you, people are asking a little bit about the sortition, and I think, although we touched on it earlier, I know that when I first joined Redbridge, it was one of my key questions: how do you make sure that it isn't just the usual suspects coming forward to get involved in these processes?
Yeah, well, we do have got someone from the Sortition Foundation on the call. I think I saw. Is Hannah on the call? There she is. I'll let her answer that question.
Oh, put me on the spot. Thank you. So Sortition works by sending out a huge number of invites to the local community. We use a randomly selected addresses, which we get from the Royal Mail postal database. So we will put in the postcodes for the local area, and it will spit out randomly selected addresses, and we will send invites to those addresses. And those people will then register their interest in taking part on our website. And from those registrations, we can then do a selection, and that selection is weighted, as Susan touched on earlier, so that it is representative of the local community. So we will have demographic targets usually given to us by the local council or government, or whoever it is who's commissioning the work, and we will weight our selection so that it is representative across those demographic targets. So you will have roughly half and half male and female. You will have a representative number of young people, old people, disabled people, people from all different ethnicities, and it looks like your local community. So you're really getting a mini public, and that's essentially, that's the work that we do. And it does bring in not the usual suspects. They are not the people who you would normally hear from. They are not the people who would normally engage. Some of them obviously will be, because they are part of the community, but actually what you're really getting is you're hearing from people who would not normally engage with this kind of process. You're giving them an opportunity, you're giving them a voice, and it's really powerful. And I'm actually particularly interested in co-design, which is why I came along to this, because I live in a co-housing community, so I've got a bit of kind of, I'm coming as a sortitian, as sortitian, but also from a personal perspective, because I've seen how valuable it is, and it's really exciting listening to you all talking about it and how brilliant it's been. So
Hannah, thank you so much, and thanks for not minding too much about being put on the spot. Well done, Susan. Question from Mark for Tony. Can you please tell us a bit more about interpretation? I saw you collected data at the end of each session. Were there any methods of collating these or design interpretations you could share?
Yeah, so it's quite a complex thing when you're gathering things from co-design or engagement, because on the one hand you might have a lot of kind of empirical data about what sort of people do or don't agree with, the sort of stats-based stuff. On the other hand, a lot of the co-design process is those little incidental conversations that you never expected to have. Someone says that sparks an idea that's incredibly relevant. You're like, oh wow, and that really shines through. So the challenge is, how do I bring all these things together in a way that the people coming on to take this project later down the line actually bother to pick up and listen to what we've said and action it, rather than thinking, crikey, that's a long report with a lot of feedback, and they can't delve into the detail. So we were really inspired about this idea of, actually, which was St Ives Council Community Charter, this idea of, like, as a co-design group, we're all going to work and word a set of principles that we all feel we can sign up and agree to. And that's where those kind of design principles came out of. And it took time over a series of workshops. We sort of drafted these principles, we shared the wording, we explained the wording, we tweaked it, we asked what was missing, we added a new principle. And so by the end, it was quite remarkable. In the last session, we sort of ran a poll to say, what kind of agreement do the group have with these principles? And they were all sort of 95% plus, basically, because of the way we worked through it. And it felt really powerful to be able to come out of a long process and say, here's a really detailed report. You're welcome to read, all the feedback that we've transcribed, and there's some great nuggets in there. But ultimately, there's 8 principles where the wording is very carefully chosen that we've all signed up to. And whatever you do in the future, service provider, building, designer, please respond to these principles. But it also gives them a lot of freedom, right? Was my point about not designing it for them and saying, this is what we want, it must be blue. It's like, actually, you're free to design and develop your services, and they can evolve and change over time. But please listen to these things that are important to us, that we've all agreed to.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tony. Yeah. I hope that was helpful. Mark, did that sort of answer your question? Yeah, I'll take a start. This is yes. Kishan, really like to ask you a little bit now about your conversations with your friends about the process, really. So you were involved in the Seven Kings, liked it so much you came back and did some of the Hainault stuff. what did you tell your friends about what you were doing, and what kind of did that change their understanding of how the council works, do you think?
So yeah, I spoke to them about, so it depended, but I spoke to them mainly about what they wanted. So the whole point was, what do we want? What do young people want in the hubs? What do we want when we're older? So main things I talked about was, what would you like when you're older? I asked them that kind of thing. And they were always like, why are you asking me? So this is so random. So I would explain to them I'm doing this hubs process. They were really interested because it's not common that the government or council wants the young person's view. Like, they don't come and ask you. They usually use their own opinions or other people's opinions. Never did they use young people's opinions. So they were really interested, and they were giving their opinions to me. I got a lot of responses of what they wanted, so it was good, because then we got a huge outlook about people in the area who wanted, because there were only around 30 of us in the process, but then for each of us 30 people, if we each asked 5, we could get a huge outlook about what everyone wanted and about what each person wanted. So yeah, their view on the council changed, because they were surprised. They had never heard of this. They were surprised that the council wants our views, and they were definitely engaging. They were giving in their opinions.
And has it changed how you feel about sort of going forward into, as you become an adult, at how you might engage in the council, in local authorities, wherever you're living?
Yeah, so I think my opinion has definitely changed, that they definitely want other people's views. And as I said before, I'm definitely more likely to use the hubs and be more affiliated with the council. So now I'm definitely more likely to, my opinion of them has gone up. So now I think that they definitely want the public's opinion, and they are trying to reach out to us. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Kishan. I'm going to come to a question from Robin now, who's wondering how the work of the community organisers, who I'm one of them, we work on the ground on an almost daily basis, how we supported the co-design process and how integral it was to the co-design process. I don't know if if Dilwara's on the call, maybe she could answer it. But if not,
I think Nita's answered it in the chat.
Fine. I just thought it might be nice for people. Nita, would you like to just talk for a couple of minutes about the sort of the community organisers' role in the co-design process?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so basically, I think first it's like understanding place. So as a Hainault community organiser, it's slightly different to Seven Kings. So in terms of Wi-Fi connection and people sort of being connected electronically, it's not so high as in Seven Kings. So our approach in Hainault when it came to promoting whilst we did take the sortition process as well to support that, we also went and took traditional sort of methods in terms of going out, flyering, postering, connecting with our stakeholders and asking our networks to promote it. So promoting through schools and what have you, promoting through the different community groups that we've connected with to spread the word, and that really supported that stream, that sortition done in terms of like getting the word out there, but sort of going a bit deeper and connecting with people. So that's where I suppose the listening campaign, making those connections with stakeholders and having sort of that trusted relationship with gatekeepers, that you send them information and then they forward it on, and people actually listen, especially like through schools. I'd say, you know, we're talking about thousands of families just all of a sudden they're getting it in their newsletters, be part of the design group or be part of the co-design or pick the architect. So I think in terms of community organising and how that supports these different streams of work, it's really establishing those strong, trusted relationships whereby you send information and they send it through directly. So if, for the instance with Hainault, people are not so, whether it's electronically connected or they're not looking at their post, they're getting a double whammy through trusted stakeholders.
Brilliant, lovely, Nita. I know Dilwara's on the call, so Dilwara, just add on your, we've talked a lot about Seven Kings and we've seen the video, so I think if you've got anything to add that's very Seven Kingsy, that would be lovely.
First of all, I'd just like to apologise for my camera being off. I'm just having a few Wi-Fi issues. Just to touch on your point, one of the things we did after the co-design, we didn't leave it that residents have participated in the co-design, therefore they'll no longer be connected with us. 2 years on, we're still very well connected with the people who are part of the co-design. They're part of the development of the community and the hub. We've also worked with 3 residents who have planned their own projects and who want to continue to be a part of the programme, to see the development of the hub, and they want to see themselves in there. As you've heard Kishan express so much of what so many of the residents are feeling. And one of the things that we did, we went and received feedback from what the experiences were of the co-design and wanted to know more beyond the building, what they would like to see in the community, what they'd like to see in their neighbourhoods, and if they'd like to be part of projects and connect with each other. So we had a reunion with the people who participated in the co-design. We've had community gatherings, we've had workshops being carried out, we've met people at cafes having one-to-ones, and just really building that community and the togetherness, all of those things that community organisers on the ground do across the 3 hub localities. I think for us, it's gone more than co-design and more than a building in itself. It's about the people, the community, and really valuing the residents who live in Redbridge. And yeah, all 6 of us, I think we do that across Redbridge.
Tawara, thank you so much. We are out of time, so I'd just like to thank everybody, all of you who've dialed in and joined the session, to my colleagues Neve and Asia and Ed for helping put this session together, to Susan Ritchie from Mutual Gain and Tony Staples from RCKa Architects for not only being part of our co-design journey in Redbridge, but for coming along and talking about it today. It's so interesting to hear your different perspectives, and huge round of applause for Kishan, who's not only taken part in 2 co-design projects, but did a video for us and then said, oh, actually it's half term, I can come along and be involved live as well. So thanks, Kishan, and thanks to Michael Willis as well, who did the video for us. I am just putting my colleague Asia's email in the chat. We've got this webinar as part of a series of presentations from the Community Hubs programme. We've got another one on Monday the 5th, which is next Monday at 1 o'clock, and that will focus on developing and implementing a shared leadership and self-managing team approach. If you're
sorry, Helen, that's changed to Tuesday.
Okay, sorry.
The details are in the chat. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's is it Tuesday at 1?
Yes.
Anyway, that sounds like if you're a manager and that sounds like a nightmare, come along and find out why it isn't. Anyway, and also if you'd like the slides and you're not connected to Redbridge, do feel free to email Asher, or you can pop your email in the chat and we will send those out to you. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.